We are about ready to introduce Kathy from the Pokemon Company, who will be doing a session on inspiration, influence, injunction, lessons learned when including third-party content in your video game. This looks like an interesting one, so we should have Kathy somewhere in cyberspace ready to come in.
Thank you.
Hey.
Oh, great. I've managed to rejoin. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries.
Off a little bit.
Brilliant. Yeah,
great.
welcome to Pocket Gamer Connects, Kathy. Are you all good
Thanks.
to begin your talk?
Yes, excited to be here. And as Chris James has previously said, it's great to have it at this format, but really missing the social, the personal networking, and being able to just like hugs and handshakes.
Yeah.
So someday we hope to get there again.
Yeah, and I'm sure we will. Yep. So if you're ready to begin, I will disappear into the quiet and let you do your talk.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Let me share my screen. Welcome everyone, and especially for those who are in different time zones, and this is later in your day. But just wanted to speak a little bit about content in video game, and wanted to also give an introduction as to my experiences with video games. Starting in 2000, I was hired by Microsoft to clear IP for a lot of their racing and sports franchises. And so there was a lot of lessons learned. For the past 20 years, I have been involved with video games. I did a little stint in the UK with Activision, and in a similar role. The other interesting thing is I haven't always been with a legal team. I've actually been with production teams, so I kind of understand development pain as well as bug regressions presenting at no-go, no-go meetings to get your content actually out into the market. So with that, I'll go to what most lawyers do here is a notice. I do work for the Pokemon Company International. We are based in the United States in near Seattle. And we are responsible for the brand, exploiting the brand outside of Asia. But for this presentation, these are my opinions, these are my experiences, and not necessarily that of any of my employers, current and past. And then I also want to make sure that people don't walk away with, this is the legal advice that I'm going to apply to content in video games. Please, please consult legal professionals or professionals in the trademark and copyright space. And they will be best positioned to advise you on specifics of what you want to do with your content. Let's see. So we'll just level set real briefly. I don't want this to become like a legal presentation, but in general, copyright is a creative work in literary, artistic, educational, or musical form. For purposes of this talk, we're going to try to focus on the more of the visual, tangible images, the ones that you would generally see immediately in video games. So when does copyright attach? It's usually when the work is created, and there's the legalese about, hey, affixed in a tangible medium of expression. So as you can assume, there's going to be some interpretations to that. And then why is there copyright? A big push for this is to protect the original expression of an idea. It's how the creator had put it into a tangible medium, but not the ideal itself. So if I'm talking about blue skies, that's not copyrighted, but then if I have some type of painting or graphic, then that is copyrighted when I actually put it onto a canvas or sketches, etc. So duration of copyright, in general, in the US, it's for the creator's life plus 70 years. Now, in different jurisdictions or in countries or territories, there are some different time periods. For example, I've seen some as creator's life plus 50, and then I've also seen some as creator's life plus 80. The interesting thing, if you are replicating an item that's copyrighted from France, interesting thing there for non-musical items, it's life plus 70 years, but if the individual died for France, so generally military service, then there's an additional 30 years added on to that time period. So it's just an illustration of how different countries may have different durations, different interpretations of what copyright is, different rights that the creator can actually impose. There's for the US, you can register your copyright, and that's the catalog, the link here. I have the full link set out because I understand that this is recorded and not provided to you. So if you have an interest in looking up copyrights, this is where you can go to look up copyrights registered with the US Copyright Office. There is also an interesting lawsuit that actually was retracted, and this was one that maybe a lot of people on this attending here or is familiar with, is the Fortnite dance lawsuits. And what's interesting there is there, even within the United States, this jurisdiction, this court decided can't do a lawsuit unless the copyright is actually registered, which isn't the case. You know, it isn't a blanket rule for all the types of courts in the United States, but in the court that this this lawsuit was filed, this is the position that they were taking on a different case. So the individuals who were bringing this lawsuit retracted it, and then I understand that they're waiting for their copyright to be registered with the US Copyright Office. And who knows when that will be. There's no SLA on when your copyright gets registered, and there's probably a huge backlog, not only due to COVID, but even prior to with the amount of copyright registrations. Another interesting about the Fortnite dance suit is it's murky regarding dance moves. There's been a tradition that choreographed dance routines can be copyrighted. So probably like, you know, something that Jennifer Lopez did, or you know, Christina Aguilera, any of them who did a dance routine. But then our moves actually, can they be considered routines? And so I think that's where there's going to be more dialogue about this, and before a lawsuit happens. Another just concept about copyright is there are times where you can use without the owner's permission. One is public domain. So public domain is after the duration, so creator's life plus X amount of years in that jurisdiction. The other is known as fair use, freedom of expression. And just touching on public domain, although that might be like, great, 70 years has passed after the creator's life, now I can actually like use it within my commercial assets. There's some nuances. For example, Italy. Italy has a cultural heritage assets law that basically says that if your asset is a public body and not for profit legal entity, and it was made over 70 years ago, and the creator is deceased, then it falls under the code of cultural heritage. So then you may actually have to get permission to use a 100-year-old statue of David for the public domain. And I know that statue of David is, the original one is more than 100 years old. So those are just some nuances that I've learned over clearing assets for video games, and just some interesting facts in this area. Fair use, freedom of expression, that's in US copyright. If you're using a part of the asset for criticism, news, reporting, teaching, or research, that's something that you can generally use. It gets really touchy when it's used for something that's going to be of put in commerce, like someone's making profit from it. And I know that even I still hear things about, oh, it's okay to use songs as long as it's only 6 seconds. There's actually no like written law that you can use snippets of songs, samplings of songs, as long as it's for less than a couple seconds. So you need to watch out for something like that, especially music. Music can be a whole nother session because of all the clearances, all the issues that music, the artist, publisher, everybody who has some type of ownership in it can have a right for you to stop using, and stop using is the injunction. One other item that I want to also bring up is something called the moral rights. Even if you do use assets, and even if it's you know, the public domain outside of Italy using for that, there also may be something called a moral right. Like, how are you using it? Are you using it in a negative way? Is it an offense to the public morality, and maybe the public morality of the jurisdiction where that asset is? So those are other items that you might have to consider when putting content into your video game. Okay. One of the items I want to also point out is Eiffel Tower. Eiffel Tower, there was a copyright in the daylight, the actual structure of the Eiffel Tower. So it was constructed in 1889, and then the lights were put onto the Eiffel Tower back in 1985. The rights of using the nighttime and the lighted Eiffel Tower are controlled by the Society of Exploration for the Tour Eiffel. Sorry, my French is bad. And even on their website, they speak about, here is what you can do with the non-illuminated and the illuminated tower. And so this is directly from their website. And I just want to point out that, you know, even things like using a structure, but maybe using it at night, can also be something that needs to be authorized for use. It will also depend on how prominent, probably, that you use the item as content in your video game. Is your whole video game associated with the Eiffel Tower, or is it in the background in a scene where a car drives by? So just, I mean, I don't know, I kind of geek out about some of this stuff, but then again, I can never like watch a movie or play a video game that has assets in it without thinking like, oh, did they get the rights? How did they manage that? And did they have a clearance team such as I had it managed at Microsoft for some of their racing game franchises? Okay, trademarks. I think everybody knows what a trademark is, and actually you can see on the Zoom screen, the big screen gaming. That logo is a, you know, can be trademark as long as the logo is being used in commerce and it's in connection with something. What a trademark actually does is indicates the source of the product or the service. So it is like the brand. We can talk about hamburgers, but then when you talk about an In-N-Out burger versus a McDonald's versus a White Castle, you know what that product, where that product is from. And then there's a lot of goodwill, reputation associated with that brand. The duration can be forever as long as the trademark is in use and associated with that good and services. So in the US also, there is a United States Patent and Trademark Office, and you are able to search for trademark registrations through that link there. So there has been a couple recent cases regarding use of trademarks without permission. And two of them I've listed down there. In 2017, the Call of Duty franchise, so the publisher Activision Blizzard, they were being sued by AM General. And this one has actually, a judgment just came down, I think, last month. But it basically is that the franchise of the Call of Duty video game has been using AM General's vehicle in there without permission. That's what the claim was. However, it's interesting because the judgment came down in saying that, hey, the presence of those vehicles helped to create and depict the modern warfare. And so because realism was the goal, then using the vehicles that are actually used by military keeps furthering that goal. And then it was determined that there wasn't a confusion between how the parties were using the marks. For example, AM General uses the marks because they sell Humvees. Activision Blizzard uses the marks to create realistic warfare video games. So if I was in the market to purchase a Humvee, I wouldn't be going to Activision Blizzard to purchase one. Right now, I haven't seen, but it could potentially go on appeal for a higher court to then ask to overturn what was decided by this lower court. Okay, just recently, I think it was last month, April. Oh, actually today it's June. Sometime in 2020, Manchester United brought a lawsuit against Sega Publishing, and this is for the game Sega Football Manager. So in Football Manager, it is alleged that the trademarks are infringed because the Manchester United badge, oh, I should have gone to that. The logo isn't being used in the Football Manager game yet. It's confusing because there's I believe it's a plain red, white, or red, yellow logo that's being used in Football Manager. So the claim is that it's confusing, as well as it deprives the owner, the rights owner, to license the logo to this game. So it'll be interesting as to how that pans out. It's just some interesting things around lawsuits going on with video games, and especially like current times. There were a few, 5-6 years ago, and then you had to really look for them. But these are a few of the lawsuits going on with copyrights and trademarks. Okay, let's see. I think I am on exceeding my time for 20 minutes. I just want to leave you with some parting thoughts. If there are times, and it depends on the risks that the companies wants to take. But if you're using copyright or a trademark, and it's very well known within your region or even within the world, it's really good to get secured or secure your contracts for those. And even if it is something that maybe an individual has created and said they created from just some inspiration, make sure that you do get some kind of documentation, not just a handshake or a verbal okay. When you're releasing your content, and when if you are assigning it to a publisher, check your contracts. The contracts will generally ask the content creators to warrant that they have all the rights for the content in the game to be used for the purpose that the publisher or the digital market is intending. Yeah, and it's sometimes it's going to be difficult because there's multiple territories and there's a lack of harmonization between country to country regarding, you know, trademark rights, trademark law, and then also copyright and copyright law. Yeah, I think that's. I'll turn it over for questions if anybody wants.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kathy. That was a really interesting thing to follow because we're in a period right now where so many games are bringing in different IPs, and especially, like, I think Fortnite is the big example where you're just seeing so many different things inside the game. We do have a couple of questions actually in the Q&A. So someone has said, you hear a lot of talk about fair use when it comes to video content and YouTube, particularly in the US. If a game is commenting on or parodying subject matter, can you use a similar argument for including the relevant material in the game? That's kind of going to be a decision of art, but it doesn't seem that if you're using if your argument is fair use and wanting to use it in a video game, the fact that you're exploiting it and you're commercializing it may go against that argument. Usually, you know, the fair use, again, if your whole game is a parody, that probably will go towards more of a fair use argument. But if it is just a little like an individual in there, like a politician or something that is one of the main characters in your game, but everything else is your own universe, that may not support your argument that it's fair use. And want to also point out that fair use will probably need to be determined by a court. So you are also looking at the risk of legal fees, court fees. Maybe there is an injunction if it's strong enough to then you know, prevent your game from continuing to being sold. But maybe not, because as long as you're making revenue, then at the end, should I win the case against you, then I will get a portion of the revenue that you brought in because you used my asset. Mm. Okay, Anthony in the chat has said, what if a user of a game shares a copyrighted graphic in a game for others to use? Is the game responsible for this? For example, in a football game, if a user uploads the shirt colors or the player likeness, is the game responsible for that copyrighted use?
Yes, yeah. The game's responsible, and your publisher, you may have made some warranties to your publisher. So yeah, going overseas doesn't dismiss the copyright claims or that can be brought against the product.
Okay, Joel in the chat says, if you have a platform and user-generated content violates some copyright, who would be considered liable?
Well, there's in the U.S. there's the Digital Millennium DCMA, Digital Copyright Millennium Act, I believe, and it gives people a way to claim that they own the item and then bring it down. So in user-generated content, the publisher or whoever is running the game will generally have on their terms of use, if you think we're using your asset, then please file a ticket or let us know, and then they'll evaluate it to bring it down. Yes, whoever's running the game is responsible for bringing it down or removing it, but then your publisher may go after you. Well, actually, for user generated, your publisher may then implement like more content review to make sure that other third-party assets aren't being used and exposing risk to the product.
Okay, and one last question here. Oh no, we've got 2 questions. Have you encountered instances where a game has benefited from not using the copyrighted material they intended to? Is it better to create your own faux brands, locations / IPS to avoid huge fees, or are they recognizable brands always worth the money?
Yeah, and that's a balance test I think you have to determine, because, for example, there are some racing games with faux brands in there where there was influence from the actual car manufacturers to design vehicles and then put into games that have been successful. But then if your game is something like Monaco GT, then maybe you want the historic racing cars in there, the teams and the manufacturers. So it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Is it the realism or is it the gaming experience? And maybe it's both, because sometimes it's really difficult to unmarry the two. Well, actually, most of the times it's difficult to unmarry the two.
Okay, we've got one more question here. Are fan works a grey area? For example, if one would create Pokemon fan art and sell prints with their fan works at a convention, is that not punished due to it not being a company but a person profiting off a property?
So I'm not going to speak for my company, but there are companies that do go after individuals, and they don't treat any differently than a corporation using the marks without permission. In dealing with clearing assets for video games, there are huge industries, licensing agencies, peripheral divisions of companies that generate a lot of revenue based on IP and then licensing out to video games, merchandising, events, etc. So it really depends on how active the company's enforcement team is. If you're at E3 and you're selling things outside the convention center, you're probably going to get a lot more eyes on you, and then a lot more reports about selling IP that probably isn't licensed versus, your local hobby store game expo.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, I will wrap that one up there because we're drifting into out of time. But thank you so much, Kathy, for joining us. That was some really good insight on third-party content, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your PGC.
Yes, great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.